ZOOPHIL-PSYCHOSIS. An image of the front cover of the ZOOPHIL-PSYCHOSIS zine, a white background with text written in dark red Gothic font above and below a black image in the middle. A red text at the top of the image reads ZOOPHIL-PSYCHOSIS, with a thin red line framing text above and below. The red text at the bottom of the image reads, "Made by the chronically ill and mad proud authors. Made for the sick who love and defend animals." End quote. The black center image is of an ink blot, commonly used in Rorschach tests as a psychological test for mental health treatment. The ink blot can be seen as a front view face of an elk. The image of the animal includes their antlers and cuts off just below their neck. The shape of a heart can also be seen above the elk's head, in between the antlers. End of image description. What is ZOOPHIL-PSYCHOSIS? Noun. Number 1. A dangerous mental disorder causing a psychotic love of animals, quote unquote. Number 2. A manufactured illness created by the animal testing industry in 1909 to stigmatize and discredit campaigns opposing vivisection as, quote, crazy and sick, end quote. Number 3. A zine created as a gift for people who are chronically ill and love animals, and as a radical resource connecting disability and animal liberation. About elk. Earthling Liberation Collective, ELK, is a radical resource for species-inclusive liberation. We advocate for transformative justice and anti-oppressive politics in response to violence against humans, animals, and the earth. www.humanrightsareanimalrights.com. Facebook.com/Earthling Liberation Collective.
Prologue. Love among the mad. "But I don't want to go among mad people," Alice remarked. "Oh, you can't help that," said the cat. "We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." "How do you know I'm mad?" Alice said. "You must be," said the cat, "or you wouldn't have come here." An image that looks like it was spray painted using a stencil. It pictures a Cheshire cat and the words, "We're all mad here." Love is scary. It is a profound experience to feel something so intense growing deep inside you. Caring about anyone, anything, with a special passion is both beautiful and terrifying, because the way in which that love is expressed determines if it will liberate us or consume us, if it will make us dangerous to the system, or dangerous to ourselves and the ones we care about. The love that consumes is familiar, institutionalized in media, education, politics, and moral laws. It is the love of the colonizer to steal and poison. It is the love of the capitalist to objectify and commodify. It is the love of the patriarch to sexualize and vilify. It is the love of the supremacist to dominate and fear. It is the love common to our species to cage and bring to extinction. This is the love of insecurity, distrust, possession, feeding a passive hostility towards whatever cannot be immediately understood, controlled, and exploited. But there is also the love that is wild, forever a challenge to practice with honest intention. It is this kind of love that we experience during those brief instances of hope, fleeting exchanges of vulnerability, within rare glimpses of liberation. It is a love that supersedes the expectations of others, growing fiercer with every attempt to bully, police, or smother it. This love is free, breathing quietly that it is forgotten. This love is queer, finding company in every identity and relationship. This love is for the self, recognizing inherent value in every expression. This love is too wild to be defined, to be given words to fully capture its essence. It is this very nature of wild love that, while defying the symbols we call language, communicates itself across all boundaries and barriers, including species. And this is how we connect with another animal, because it takes love to nurture an ability to relate, to give presence, to watch and listen with intention, to truly empathize. All this is a radical skill, a superpower, a flame in the darkness of night that we can guide us like stars above, to keep us warm as we wait for our star to rise again. A radical empathy for animals requires a certain quality of vulnerability, and yet in this apparent weakness, we are capable of showing our greatest strength, a deep expression of who we really are. All this is a language of love. Despite any claims to the contrary that suggest this compassion is an illness to be treated, medicated, pathologized, discouraged. And so this is who this zine is for, really, for the sick, the chronically ill, the mad, the crazy. This zine is for the sick struggling to experience this wild love. For those so sick that they begin to forget what it feels like to be loved. And those so sick that love is one of the few remaining feelings that offer an identity and purpose, as we all struggle, cope, eat, relapse, bleed, heal, cry, resist, sleep, and resist. So do not apologize. Do not apologize because your pain, your growth, your sicknesses, your dreams, and your fears are all valid and revolutionary. Do not apologize because your apologies will not be heard anyway, because your voice is not for their ears, but for those truly listening for love. Do not apologize for refusing to conform to the sickness of this world we have been born into, of hopelessness and apathy, of hate and numbness, of lost communication, the real illness. Never apologize for what you feel, however you feel it. Instead, keep loving, keep resisting, keep liberating, for the animals, for others, for ourselves, in sickness and in health.
We leave this page blank as a reminder of all those who could not contribute, those without the words, the time, the spoons, or the life to share themselves. You are loved. Fredimir. Another nightmare kicks in. My body is pumping with adrenaline. Sweat drips down my face, and distorted images of being abused floods my mind. Even though I am asleep, I can feel my body convulsing, and I yearn to wake up. But to what? Once I awake, my life would barely be distinguishable from my nightmares, and the chronic pain, mental and physical, will return in full force. In the background, the beeps of my alarm blares, and I swipe on my phone to stop the noise, yet I'm not fully awake yet. I turn to my side. I hold the blankets towards my wet face, and then I feel the kneading of my cat into the top of my head. Subsequently, I swat at my cat in an effort to make him go away, but he continues relentlessly. I can feel his claws dig into me, and he starts licking my hair. I toss and turn to keep him off me, but he does not care and does not stop trying to wake me up. I sigh loudly at him and take the blankets off me, which makes my cat jump off my bed. I stretch out my arms and carefully get up. My shoulders begin to ache, and I gently massage them as I look down at my cat on the floor. I am hungry, he tells me, while looking up at me with his wide yellow eyes. I am aware, I tell him, but he does not budge. He stares at me as his striped ginger tail swishes back and forth against the wooden floor. Fredimir, I have an alarm for a reason, you know. I continue. I pick up his empty pink food bowl and leave my room while Fredimir follows me into the kitchen. I reach for the dry cat food at the top of the fridge and start pouring it into his bowl. A yawn leaves my mouth, and I place the dry cat food back on top of the fridge. Fredimir meows at me hungrily as I walk towards my room, and he follows me until I put his bowl down. Then he devours his food immediately. You should take your meds, he basically orders me. I'll get to it later, I say as I wipe the drool off my mouth. I'll take them with my antipsychotic at night, okay? Soon enough, he shakes his head at me and then licks his paws, which means that I really should take my meds, otherwise I will face his frustration later on. I pick up my phone off my bed and put it in my pants pocket, ignoring the Facebook messages that brighten up my phone's screen. I head to the bathroom and I open the meds drawer, which is currently overflowing with painkillers, muscle ointment, testosterone, antidepressants, and antipsychotics. Looking through them, I take my antidepressant and painkillers first with water. I've been on them for years, and even though I take them daily, usually, but it always feels like a chore. Did you take them? Fredimir says in the distance. Yeah, of course I did, I yell at him. You should eat something, he yells back at me. I slouch and head to the kitchen. I filled the sink with unwashed dishes prior, and I look through the shelves for any sign of clean dishware, but to no avail. My shoulders still ache and I feel irritable, but I turn on the tap and begin to clean the dishes. The smell of soap is unfamiliar to me because I have not washed myself in days. I can almost smell my armpits, which causes me to cough violently. Hearing my coughs, Fredimir walks into the kitchen, and he looks up at me while I still have dishes in my hands. You okay? He asks out of concern. I quietly reply. I'm glad you're washing the dishes, he tells me proudly. I continue cleaning the dishes until I finish them. Then I place 2 slices of bread into the toaster, and I take out a jar of peanut butter out of the fridge. While I wait for the toaster to toast my bread, I towel dry a wash plate and a butter knife, and I place them on the counter. Leaning against the counter, I close my eyes and I think back on my nightmares, which causes my whole body to shake fiercely. I feel strangely disconnected to my body, which urges me to look at the back of my hands. I put my hands in front of my face and watch them shake and turn. As I observe my hands, Fredimir interrupts me with his meowing, and I shake myself back into reality, then look down at him. Remember, practice mindfulness, he reminds me. I nod at him. I hear the toaster make a sound to signify the toast is ready, and I feel the heat of the toast. I place the 2 slices of toast on my plate, and I finger the crust, noticing its change in texture. With the butter knife, I start spreading peanut butter on the toast, and I clutch the handle of the knife in my hand, feeling its metallic shape. After I spread the peanut butter on the toast, I touch the peanut butter with my fingers and lick it off my finger. I notice its taste and how it sticks to the roof of my mouth. Well, Fredimir asks while rubbing against my leg. I smile at him. Thank you for the reminder, I tell him sincerely. I go to sit on the couch with my plate of peanut butter toast on my lap, and Fredimir plops next to me. He nudges my arm in order to get food from me, but I shake my head at him and begin to eat. With each bite, I feel better about myself, and I keep chewing while feeling the peanut butter cover my teeth. The phone in my pants pocket begins to vibrate and start ringing, so I put down the toast and answer the phone without looking at the number. Hello? I ask tiredly. Did I wake you up? A woman on the phone asks me, and I roll my eyes. Nah, I am okay. Is this the mental health team? I lie about being okay, but at least I'm trying not to do anything drastic. Yes, it is. I wanted to make sure you're all right and that you're coping, she tells me with genuine concern in her voice. I'm eating food. I keep getting flashbacks, and sometimes I hear voices, but the Seroquel is helping, I tell her honestly. I hear the approval in her voice, and I continue. Is there anything else you're here to tell me? We've booked you an appointment with a psychiatrist for next week, and I just wanted to check on you, she informs me. That's great. I am okay. I'm just going to continue eating. Good to hear. Bye. She hangs up. Fredimir looks up at me, and I kiss him on his forehead, which makes him purr, and that makes me feel content with life. I pat his head a few more times, and then I continue eating. But Fredimir interrupts me. I'm proud of you for taking care of yourself, he tells me. Wednesday lives in Brisbane, Australia, and is a vegan that has several chronic invisible illnesses: psychosis, BPT, bipolar disorder, PTSD, thalassemia, insomnia, and hyperinsomnia. Hold My Ghosts by Craig. I tell my friends, I tell them that I'm trying, that the ghosts that follow me have become too many, that I'm trying to count them down. I'm tired and they weigh on me. They watch me eat, grazing and clucking, ambivalent towards me. Yet there they are. My ghosts happily greet me in the shower. As I lather and rinse, they wag their tails, or hop away from the dripping water. Some watch from the closet as I put on the clothes they made thousands of, that I paid nothing for, and they were paid nothing in return. They hold my money, they hug my waist. I walk in on my ghosts, and so they follow me. To see, I guess, how they are being used in their afterlife. And as I walk, I see the ghosts of others, the ones we kill, the ones we are killing. Some people don't seem to mind. Maybe they don't see them, or maybe they like the company. But I'm tired, and I'm trying. I'm trying to count them down, because I've lost track, and I can no longer hold my ghosts. Craig is 30 and loves animals. He's blessed with a wonderful partner, a hilarious dog with a human name, and a baby girl whose giant owl eyes fill the world with joy. He writes to pass the time and to dredge up the things that trouble him most. He firmly believes in ghosts, and this piece explores the cost of living and the haunting it may cause. Animal Liberation and the Need for Healing by Corvus. Content notes: descriptions of animal suffering, activist trauma, mention of abuse and sexual assault. The intersection of animal liberation and disability has overshadowed almost everything else in my realm of experience. It overshadows my queer and trans identities, my poverty and class struggle, my anti-racist and consent activism, and the mass action of black blocs and tiny street marches I participated in. Animal liberation opened the gates to my radical worldview, despite its hostile reception in local radical circles. The horrors of animal exploitation, coupled with the massive, often intentional ignorance of how vast it is, have exasperated my lifelong chronic health struggles and have caused new health struggles to emerge. When I saw the call for this zine, I felt an electric rush through my entire body, some mixture of triggered despair and absolute happiness of feeling met by its existence. An anti-authoritarian proponent of animal liberation, I'm torn between worlds. The non-radical white middle to upper class cisgender hetero vegans who use racism, classism, and misogyny to promote animal campaigns, and radicals and anarchists willing to put their bodies on the line to combat some human oppression, but often dismiss or even ridicule struggles for non-human animals. I've undoubtedly made mistakes in trying to bridge these divides. Daily, I watch both sides ignore crucial intersections, knowing in my heart that our treatment of non-human animals is deeply connected to our human oppressions. PTSD ranks among my other physical and mental health conditions. I developed chronic pain and fibromyalgia early in my life, no doubt related to lifelong parade of trauma. PTSD from rape, intimate partner abuse, a life of former drug addiction and everything that entails, and experiences with animal liberation activism. There's a difference between my PTSD from events happening directly to me and my body versus my PTSD from witnessing damage to the bodies of others. I've created animals in my hands who are dying from human cruelty and neglect, and I've held animals in my hands who've experienced safety and love through rescue. Unfortunately, the latter has been less frequent than the former. The decline in my health rendered me incapable of contributing much to anything. I know a huge factor is that I couldn't stop. I used to torture myself. Every time I wanted to quit or take a break, I reminded myself that animals never get a break, and so I had to keep going. I watched every undercover video, followed every story. I had no social life. Dealing with bipolar disorder and traumatic disorders since I was a kid shaped how I handled these experiences and how I reacted to them. I worked, organized, sometimes ate, rarely slept. That was my life. Two experiences stick out as precipitating my downfall. I participated in a rescue that came out of a massive animal hoarding shelter situation paired with multi-state corruption. An undercover investigator had gone to several state and private shelters, asking for help to shut this place down. No one would. I was on the steering committee of a small animal rights group, doing the work of a large one, and we tried to discover why. We found many of these shelters had been sending animals to this hoarding facility. We found falsified veterinary and intake records, inspections that showed no problems, evidence of rescues in other states shipping animals to this facility, and we even had the head of a non-local animal rights group come out in support of the place because it was no kill, despite an investigator from his own organization warning about the place years earlier. It was even rumored that this facility sold animals to laboratories. Finally, we found an in-state organization willing to take the case, but they only sent enough people for the original rescue and understaffed the aftermath. I was working full-time at my day job while pulling 12-hour shifts plus 2-hour drives on the weekends, while other volunteers worked around the clock trying to help the hundreds of surviving animals. Animals' eyes were falling out of their heads, and sometimes their skin would tear off when you picked them up. Hundreds cried out in pain around me, but I could only get to one at a time. Many died in their own filth because I could not help them, no matter how fast I tried to go. The stench alone was unbearable. I would come home and strip down in the basement, terrified I would carry this systemic calic virus home with me on my clothes and infect my own animals. I would hear and see cats running through the house who weren't there. I would obsessively check my own rescue animals for signs of the virus. I couldn't get the smell out of my nostrils. I couldn't get the memories of their cries out of my mind. All the while, a media campaign vilified the evil animal rights activists for shutting down a sweet lady's nice cat rescue. Half the animals survived, miraculous considering the illnesses they suffered. I stopped pulling volunteer shifts when my health wouldn't allow it any longer, and hated myself every day for it. How could I abandon them? I split off from the organization entirely when it became more about prison than about animals. While I understand the impulse to imprison animal abusers, I couldn't support using a system profiting off slavery and oppression to solve animal slavery and oppression. Later, I co-founded an anti-authoritarian and anti-animal testing organization, where I ended up doing the vast majority of the work. Not because others involved were lazy, but because they had a healthier set of boundaries and less of an obsession than I did. I lost sleep doing research and organizing, and was barraged with nightmares about animals when I did sleep. Some radicals supported our work as a non-single issue, while other radicals shunned and ridiculed mentions of veganism or including non-human animals in our fights against oppression. I worked at a local university doing human research and used my position to access information about non-human animal research being conducted there. I was constantly on edge, living in fear of getting caught. FBI agents and private security surveilled our protests and events right out in the open, in suits with wires hanging out of their ears, behind tinted windows with surveillance equipment on the dashboards. I'd assumed they would try to be sneakier, but I guess not. Researchers at the university were studying pain by putting rats on hot plates, addicting macaques to cocaine, and depriving them of water, measuring the progression of untreated HIV, SIV in non-human primates, and many other horrific things. I wanted it to stop. I needed it to stop. It didn't stop. The organization disbanded when it didn't have the resources to continue, emotionally or financially. The labs still stand tall around the city, but I know we started much needed conversations. That was something. Having endured these experiences and more, I can't say I blame people for shying away from the work. It's hard work. It comes with huge costs and small reward. Cost is even greater when you're chronically ill. Every time I see a new undercover video, my thoughts are not only with the animals depicted, but also the investigators. Are they okay? What are they doing to take care of themselves? If I had any advice to the new activists with mental health struggles, it would be this. You can't do it all. It's not okay to do it all. It's okay to sleep and eat and take care of yourself. It will never be enough, and you will always be enough. And that's okay, because it all matters. Every life you touch and save matters. When I try to talk about these things, I can often see and feel just how much they are not taken seriously by radical and non-radical communities alike. I believe healing is lacking in both communities. In one, because people fight and fight and fight oppression until they burn out, and in the other because they ignore and ignore and ignore it. But it still exists. It will always exist. And while I try to know now that I'm safe in this moment, and what people have done to me is not who I am, what I have watched and experienced humans doing to other animals has left a vast cavern of pain and loneliness inside me. I do not know how to heal this pain. I do not know how to confront this trauma in a world that can't even acknowledge the massive exploitation and suffering of non-human animals, let alone the trauma of witnessing said exploitation. I have been hypersensitive since birth. I have a degree in psychology and worked in a field of research for 5 years and clinical for 3 years before my health issues took over and left me completely unable to work. I know full well why people do what they do to animals and why people ignore what happens to them. I know the farm workers beating animals while making minimum wage do so because in order to endure the exposure to such cruelty, they must reduce the animal to an object of vilification in order to survive the job psychologically and survive financially. I understand scientists who abuse and exploit animals for their research went through several years of school where every objection they may have held against harming animals was met with ridicule and threat of expulsion, while also being told it is a necessary evil to save lives. I understand well why people ignore animal liberation as a part of a radical thought or day-to-day thing we must fight for. People have their own struggles and can't imagine adding another thing to care about. People cannot handle the reality that while they are fighting oppression on the surface, underneath there is a vast and horrific level of exploitation which they contribute to directly. When we grow up accepting something for so long, it becomes difficult to change. The Milgram experiments on authoritarianism, where people willingly delivered perceived punishing shocks to another participant because the experimenter told them to. The bystander effect, where the more people are around during an incident, the less likely someone is to help the victim. The just world fallacy, the world is good and so anything bad that happens to someone must be the victim's fault, and so on. The guilt one must feel and overcome in order to confront animal liberation or any other systemic oppression perpetuated by one's demographic, like my journey as a white person confronting white supremacy, is overbearing and heavy. It takes a lot of energy to acknowledge what we have done and still do to non-human animals, and even more energy to understand how that informs how we have harmed and still harm our fellow humans. Many people at the intersection struggle so much with oppression directed against them, they can't even bear acknowledging that they may be oppressing someone else. And of course, class-privileged vegan campaigners urge that we vote with our dollars, rather than change our hearts and minds in interactions with non-human animals. I say this as a vegan, but also as someone who believes veganism is only one of the many steps we must take towards seeing other animals as deserving and equal. These understandings of human nature frustrate me. They remind me of every single atrocity in the world allowed to happen that we all look back on horrified and think, I would never do a thing like that, when in reality most people would have. I can only hope that one day we will look back on the factory farms, fur sheds, laboratories, breeding facilities, and so on, and think the same. Even though we would be wrong that our ability to take part in socially accepted atrocities, I hope one day someone looks back and says, remember when people used to torture non-human animals under the guise of understanding humans better? Yeah, and they did that to other marginalized groups of humans too. And of course we'll be learning our lessons forever, because intersectionality means this systemic oppression cannot end if only one facet of our unjust world is addressed. But I do hope that one day all of this trauma will mean something more than the pain, frustration, and burnout I feel today. Corvus is a queer trans butch from the Middle Atlantic region of the US, who writes as a hobby and an outlet. Their writings have been featured in Bound to Struggle 5, Praxis, Letters to the Man, Responses to the Patriarchy, Sexism and Misogyny, Steel City Revolt, and in various other feminist and anarchist publications. They also blog more rarely than they should for queer mental health and industrial anti-oppression, and still holds a dream of working on a farm sanctuary someday, despite their disabilities. Why Am I So Easy to Replace? By Milda. This piece questions the view where everything and everyone can be replaced and seen as worthy only if useful for someone else's agenda. An image of a black and white drawing of a cat that looks like they were fading away to the left. On the left side of the image, there are words, "Why am I so easy to replace?" Milda Banzaiti lives in Lithuania, Germany, and the UK, creating behind the alias AIWS. They are an autistic queer vegan artist, and their work mostly portrays the cruel and dark world, as well as questions humanity and its imperfections. www.aiws.lt. Norman by Mary Fantaschi. Trigger warning: descriptions of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse and of animal cruelty. I lead an extremely busy life, what with my schooling, my part-time job, and my romantic partner at the time, and I liked it that way, even though the stress from the lifestyle could be quite high at times. Indeed, I once had a complete emotional breakdown when I was in the middle of studying for an extremely difficult test known as the GRE. My laptop decided it would be a good time to shut down. However, besides such moments, I was content. Then the fighting between my partner and I started, and I use the term fighting here intentionally because these were not arguments. They were something more sinister and damaging. My partner had a way of always spinning the fights so that I believed they were my fault. A tactic I learned much later is called gaslighting. As a result, I began wondering if there was something wrong with me, as if I were defective. And so even when he began pushing me and leaving bruises on my forearms from grabbing me, even when I began feeling sick to my stomach and having extreme vaginal and external pain after penetrative sex, even when my throat was raw and my scalp sore from holding my head and pushing it violently down during oral sex to the point where I was gagging and crying, I stayed with him. I stayed because his emotional abuse had succeeded in making me believe that no one but him would put up with me. For after all, I was clearly disgusting, horrible person that no one else would want to be near, let alone start an intimate relationship. Finally, one day I realized that this relationship was as toxic as a slow-acting poison, quietly damaging each and every one of my organs, and leisurely yet deliberately filling up my mind and soul until I realized I was drowning, and I only had a very short time in which I could save myself. There was nothing different about this day, and so even now I am unsure as to how I came to this realization. But even if I still did not fully grasp the idea that I had been seriously abused for years, I still did. He was engaging in his usual behavior of threatening to leave me if I did not allow him to have intercourse with me, reminding me that I would never find someone else who loved me if I did not oblige. And so I let him push himself into me, feeling my vagina tear as he viciously rammed himself into me, each thrust feeling like a knife. I could feel the hot tears slowly sliding down my cheeks, not so much a product of the physical pain, for tragically I had gotten somewhat used to it, but the result of the poisonous feelings of shame, incredible sadness, and extreme intense anger. These feelings that I had been unconsciously holding for years, only continued to spill out of me once he left, and it gave me the courage to end our relationship. Unfortunately, this did not mean that he disappeared from my life. He called and texted constantly, sometimes using other phone numbers to trick me into responding, and worst of all were the threats he made to either hurt me or those important to me, or to commit suicide. Even though I continued to ignore his every attempt to get me to take him back as a romantic partner, I still felt his presence at all times, clinging onto me like sticky burrs, and so I decided to leave the city for a while. I was accepted to work at a non-human animal sanctuary as an intern. The sanctuary was for farmed animals who had been abused. It was a place where they could live out their lives in peace, while being looked after at the same time by caregivers who love them, some who value them enough to even call them family. At the time, I was vegetarian and considered myself to be a great lover of animals. However, when I heard that I would have to live a vegan lifestyle while on the sanctuary property, I thought this to be a little extreme, for what cruelty was involved in creating cheese or scrambled eggs? Surely no one died for these products. And so my mentality at this juncture in my life was that I would eat vegan while working on the sanctuary, and then go right back to consuming my beloved cheese once back at home. However, everything changed when I met one of the best friends I had ever had in the entirety of my life. Not only did I decide to become a vegan after learning how he and his brothers, whom were male calves born into the dairy industry and thus being considered useless, were simply thrown on a dead pile to starve to death, but I also felt healed from the abuse that I too had suffered. This is not to say that I did not have scars on my soul, sometimes resulting in nightmares or panic attacks, but I sincerely believe that had I not met this friend, I would be in truly worse shape than I am now. Another wonderful consequence of my spending time with him and learning from his incredible wisdom is that I began to see the commonalities between the terrible treatment of women in our society, which, as a result of metaphorical objectification, ranges from daily catcalls and concealed sexism to the abuse I faced along with rape culture and the way in which we oppress non-human persons, especially farmed persons, through both metaphorical as well as literal objectification, resulting in such callous treatment ranging from using them as breeding machines to brutally slaughtering them and cutting them up for human consumption. This realization would later end up being the springboard from which I started my thesis research. Therefore, it would be fair to say that this dear friend of mine completely and totally saved and changed my life. And so ever abundant love, I write this following tribute. For you, my friend and my love. When I first met you, I was ignorant both of your beautiful and much of the world around me. I guess when we met I was hoping to find something, but finding you was certainly not what I was suspecting. I first saw you from a distance, although still this was the closest I had ever been to someone like you. Your skin was a beautiful shade of pale orange, like the color of wheat lit up by sunshine, with white highlights. I was interested in you because of your difference, but as much as I am ashamed to admit it, I did not think you were someone particularly special. The first time we spent together was honestly a result of my feeling lonely, dejected, and broken, and after having just somewhat escaped from an extremely abusive relationship. For some reason, as I strode up to you, I did not consider the possibility that you might reject me. Perhaps because deep down I must have somehow known that you were kind and virtuous. I walked towards you, feeling the crunchy yellow blades of dry summer grass beneath my boots, while a gentle warm breeze played with my hair. I sat down beside you and followed your gaze, unsure of what you were looking at, but then thinking that perhaps you were not looking at all, but were instead just feeling the world around you. It was then that I got an inkling of your peaceful nature and wisdom. We sat there for a while, without you really giving me so much as a glance, until you looked at the apple I had forgotten I brought with me as a snack. As your eyes moved to gaze down at the apple, they connected with mine for a single moment. And yet during that moment I saw so much of your gorgeous deep marble eyes, and instantly felt my inner being warm as I felt both comforted and cared for. It was then that I broke our peaceful, heartening silence to ask you if you wished to have some of the apple, and so I used my teeth to break it apart into pieces we could share. After doing so, I took the chance to really concentrate on looking into your amazing eyes, and found my thoughts and emotions gliding into those profound, cavernous marble ponds, and became lost in what I found I could not separate my energy, my feelings, my being, my soul from yours. For the first time in years, I felt truly content and calm, as if your eyes had covered me in a blanket, warm from just being out of the dryer. I felt connected with you in a way that I had never felt before with anyone else. And despite us having just met, I felt genuinely and purely loved. You then kissed me lightly on my hand, and then my cheek, touching the tears I had not even realized were there. little beats of joy that were the result of realizing that in those short yet eternal moments we had just shared, you had healed me. From then on, we spent hours together every day, sharing both apples and kisses. I found myself falling into your love as if being gently guided into a warm pond, so calm that there were not even ripples to be seen, where I could just contentedly float, and everything was wonderful. You were beautiful, magical, ethereal. You were a genuine angel. When it was time for me to leave, I had no idea as to how I was going to bear it. Indeed, it was only with the courage you passed on to me, as you kissed my cheeks and hands with your rough cat-like tongue to the point of being raw. Only with you telling me with complete certainty that our love went beyond apples, kisses, naps, and the warm sunshine and cuddles. You showed me that I had to share our story, so that everyone I encountered could understand this special pure love, assembled with happiness, mutual respect, happiness, intersectional compassion. To show the angels do indeed walk among us, one just has to take the time to truly see them. I kissed the tip of your nose and the top of your forehead, allowing my tears to drip onto your face, to merge into streams around the perfectly heart-shaped mark that I had come to know so dearly. I knew you were right, but my human self was still worried about not being physically in your presence, especially since you were older and had not much time left in that body. And so as I knelt there in the golden field with you, I bent my head down one last time, pressing my forehead against yours, and then kissed that soft, felt-like heart. I could feel the wetness of my tears on my trembling lips as I whispered, "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for teaching me true compassion, serenity, meditation, oneness, and love. Thank you for healing me. Please do not die before I can come back and be with you once again. I love you." I never did get to see you again, to feel your giant hug or rough kisses. You died very shortly after I left. It hurt, oh gosh, did it ever hurt my heart. But I could still feel your love around me, like the warm, caressing summer breezes we enjoyed together. As painful as the twinges in my heart and soul were, I was okay. You knew in all your wisdom that I would be. You knew that I needed to meet you, and so you stayed on this earth, in that body, just long enough to heal and love me, so others may learn and heal from my telling the story of your beauty. Angels who are too good for this world may only remain on it for so long. As many years later as I write this, but I still shed tears in your honor. For I will not lie, it hurts. My heart aches every day that I can no longer converse with you in the way we did, that I cannot hug your warm neck, nuzzle into your white heart, and smell your always sweet scent of grass and sunshine, and that I cannot kiss your cool, smooth nose as I lean against your belly. But instead of mourning privately, I listened to your last advice and you communicated to me, which was to share our story so that the people, ignorant as I was, will learn how special your kind is, and to fight for you, both via peaceful, gentle activism and by yelling at the top of my lungs for those who are not so lucky as we were, for those who are exploited and tortured, who will never sit in grass fields and feel the warm sun on their backs, or the sweet taste of apples in their mouths. I will die screaming for your bovine brothers and sisters. This is why I attend vigils outside slaughterhouses, for they, after having plastic shoved in their ears, after being excruciatingly dehorned and some castrated, all without anesthesia, after being crammed into feedlots where they all end up covered in their own waste, and where the sick receive no treatment and are instead left to suffer, after being shoved into a filthy truck through the use of electric prods, where they have spent days, no matter the weather, some being so ill that they cannot even stand up, they arrive here. They can smell the blood, and even if they do not know exactly what is about to happen, they know it is something that they should be scared of. And so they panic, tripping over each other in the overcrowded trucks, some trying to kick their way out. Here in the short moments we, those who are bearing witness, get to spend with them, we tell them that they matter to us, that they are loved, and offer them apples, and that they should get to enjoy as they are free in a field, as my Norman and I used to. Trucks then back up to the slaughterhouse, unloading these innocent, beautiful, non-human persons, by once again using electric prods to force the terrified animals into a place where they can sense the death in the air. Here they will be hung upside down and have their throats cut in a sawing motion, as The blood pours out of them. They can see their family experiencing the same agonizing torture. And they kick and scream, fighting for both their lives and those of their herd mates. They are dismembered and skinned, and horrifically, they are sometimes still alive during the process, as their suffering is not worth slowing down the kill line. This is because to the industry and our society, they are mere objects. Just as I was an object to my old partner, to be used as an emotional punching bag and a sex toy, these lovely innocent beings are objects to be used for food. The feelings of women, non-human persons, disabled persons, and others who are marginalized are of no consequence, because we are simply considered to be a means to an end. Because we may not stand on 2 feet, such as non-humans beings and some of the disabled, and because we may not be thought of as rational thinkers, we are considered to have no intrinsic value, and thus our exploitation, our suffering, our pain, and even our deaths, no matter how agonizing, are considered acceptable. It is this which my amazing, beautiful, bovine love, Norman, taught me to fight. He showed me that all life is precious, and that when this is realized, we can become one with each other in the deepest, most profound sense, as Mother Nature intended. Mary, ethical, inclusive vegan, environmentalist, feminist, queer, cis, 20s, chronic illness warrior.
A love letter to the persecuted Awise Minwa Anishinabek. It's tough being colonized. I really feel for Awise that are stolen from their homes, put into smaller spaces without their consent, and then killed just because of who they are. I feel like Anishinabek lived this story too. And when I take a few moments to understand how my life is interconnected with the animals that are intrinsically connected to this land, sometimes I'll cry. Not always, because I've developed an immunity to pain. Maybe it's a skill to be able to hold my tears back. Every time that I hold my tears back, I feel like they are building a wall ever more high that protects me from the pain of colonization. Avoiding hurt based in hate is a skill. I haven't perfected it yet, though. But then sometimes I get lucky. I see stories that inspire the fire deep within my soul. A few weeks ago, a whole herd of bison reclaimed their ancestral territory in so-called Saskatchewan. It was awesome. There was no one to tell them where to go. There weren't any imaginary boundaries restricting their freedom. It was like they were free. I wish I was free. I wish I could live in the ways of my ancestors without anyone telling me that it's wrong, savage, backwards, uncivilized. Because back when it was just Anishinabek living here with Awise, there wasn't torture, there wasn't mass production, there wasn't a disregard for life. It was just us living in harmony with the world. We were healthy then. We were all free. Now my people have diabetes. Now Anishinabek are dying, all because of who we are, because we are removed from our ways, because they say we are savage, backwards, uncivilized. We got sick because our bodies aren't used to the sugar, the flour, the lard, all the foods they gave us to make us more like them. Now my people are decolonizing their food choices, and it's happening again. We're being defined as savage, backwards, and uncivilized. My heart hurts because my people have been through so much at the hands of the people who tell us the same things over and over again. We aren't enough of this. Let's be more like them when being like them makes us sick. But please, tell me once again that I need to evolve because of the ways those people treat animals. I think maybe there's confusion. It isn't Anishinabek that have industrial facilities for the warehousing and mass murder of over-medicated animals. Something about this story reminds me of residential school, because it was also those people that stole our mothers and warehoused them in school far from their mothers and tried to kill the Anishinaabe spirit within them. Remembering this makes me sick. But I think I will feel better to see things the way they used to be, back when we were savage, uncivilized, backwards, because as far as I can see, being like them just makes us sick. At least they aren't being killed for their food choices. We were. In fact, the Canadian government recognized our relationship with the Owise and killed them off to the point of extinction. They removed our food sources with a terrible violence. Not only have they tried to kill off Owise, but they are also killing the land and the water that Owise, Mi'kmaq, Anishinaabe survive from. And yet, because we hunt, we are the ones who are savage, backward, uncivilized. Owise are sick, and so are we. The land and the water are poisoned. This makes me sick. But hey, let me be clear. Our connection to Owise isn't subsistence-based only. After all, we are Anishinaabe. Our communities are rooted in clan systems that emulate the behaviors of Owise, so maybe we too can be like them. Our systems have nearly been eradicated. Deer clan, bear clan, fish clan, moose clan, turtle clan, crane clan, marten clan. We love and honor creation, not because it is ours, but because it is part of the world that we live in. We resist their ways so that we can live our original ways once again. Gazaga and we say, it's time to fall in love again. The contradiction is probably too much for them to handle, but I won't call them names because they can't understand the honor, the ceremony, the interconnection that happens when we harvest and we say so that we can be healthy once again. So maybe once again we can live in balance, so we can be Anishinaabe once again. I'm done talking about being sick now, because I'm evolving towards a place where I refuse to allow others to define who I am any longer. All life is sacred. Menom bamadzawin kadokajitwa. The next time they want to stage an action at an industrial facility that murders defenseless animals, I hope they call me. We can work together to destroy the systems that kill Owise, the land and the water. But if they come to me with colonial criticisms of our ancestral ways of living, I hope they take some real time to understand the ways those people are killing my people. Take some time to understand colonial capitalism and how we are not the ones to be blamed for the disconnection between human and Owise. This is a love letter mostly to Anishinaabe and maybe me too. Maybe I'm letting myself know that despite the ongoing persecution for being who we are, we will continue to be who we are, no matter what they call me, no matter how they judge me, because I'm sick of being sick. This love letter pads my heart so that our ways of living will stop being villainized, because you see, I love Owise just the same way they do, probably more. But I don't expect them to understand because I wrote this letter to Owise, Mi'kmaq Anishinaabe, because we both face the same persecution over and over again. This letter is to remind us that we're going to be okay. The time for sickness is almost over because, like the bison at the beginning of this letter, we are reclaiming our territory, our identities, and our lives.
Sleep Ceremonials, A Mad Story by Victoria Lyon. The animals who bring offerings from the forest have come for me. When I was given a pass to go home, I went to the stockyards instead to avoid confronting my mother and father. I climbed the chain-link fence and complained to the animals that the only vegetarian meal in the hospital was American cheese on white bread. They suggested that they could aid me in escaping discreetly in exchange for a favor, which I agreed to, and I slept in the dirt outside the pen that evening. The creatures have kept their promise, and now it's time for me to repay them. 12:30 in the morning. With only the moon softly blink, I climb the ravine in my stocking feet, groping for branches. Black bulls weave in and out of my nausea, their faces glowing under fluorescent lamps for the festival of the dead, grazing Aspoda Hodel. Those who survive the parched throats and insomnia of the journey there find no space for sleep upon arrival, and hens are violently woken and hung by their feet shortly after they fade into each other's wintry wings. We tend to associate the lives of animals with bodily suffering, and this appears to make sense, since the display of their bodies with Their enclosing barriers desecrated is the primary spectacle in which they are presented to us. Yet if we ask ourselves who is most discontented with civilization above all, we find that the suffering of animals is primarily the suffering of the psyche. In order for me to be declared sane, I must regard the interiors of my own body with constant suspicion. But the absence of stigmata and other strange blemishes on my skin is deceptive. The nightmares that animals have do not affect their market price. Even sows in farrowing crates have their sleep ceremonials, which go unnoticed by men with chalk prods. Hospitals and slaughterhouses are very particular about regimenting sleep. Indeed, one of the first things they take away upon your arrival there is your ability to choose when to go to sleep and when to wake up. The machines don't stop during the night, because otherwise humans and animals alike would forsake sleep to weave blankets from the suffering of their world. On the killing floor, the creatures hide me between their bodies so that I won't be found, the blood of their brothers and sisters soaking through my pajamas. Their curls are warm and they ask me to stay still, but I can only tell them in vain that closing my eyes is impossible. The flames of a black sun pass over as we lie down, brushing our arms and legs, and I wonder from what strange part of space it spins, what forms of life it must have given risen to. I explain to the animals that the others must not recognize me. At 6 a.m, around the time the hospital breakfasts are served, always including bacon and eggs, which I refused, the dismemberment begins, and they beg me to heal them. I run to the tannery down the street, salvage what I can from the garbage bin, and I sew their pieces together with strands of my hair, and wrap their wounds in the wounds of others. We unfold our broken remainders in our arms and make out our reflection in glass eyes. A procession of animals walks into traffic, blocking intersections with limbs missing, lying down on sidewalks and breathing clouds. Having given up the ability of modern psychology to purge my malady, I read the work of Julia Kristeva and wrote fairy tales of wandering in a pressurized womb of an alchemist's oven, slowly baking my bones to charcoal in preparation for the final flourish. A miracle that knocks me out. I imagined pipelines carrying black bile snaking across the countryside, and the street St. Vincent Millay notwithstanding, I learned that the unconscious in the kingdom where nobody ever dies, where all that is needed is to toss a basket into the ocean and dredge up everyone you've known alive and together. Millay could describe the death of a cat with an unashamed tenderness in her poem, but the pre-originary clarity dissipated, and she felt the need to conclude that animals are nobody that matters. Reduced to the sheer heaviness of their corporate reality, all animals are Holbein's dead Christ. And there would perhaps be less shame than we think in burying each other in cardboard boxes with our names spelled out in stickers. Like many young children, I stressed about whether or not animals went to heaven as a little girl. I think that the more poetic answer might be that they don't. We learn about dying through encounters with the world of animals, and I think that there are moments of clarity during our fits of madness that allow us to imagine their constant bewilderment. Like that grotesque icon which understandably never overlooked an altar, they force us to contemplate a world without a happy resurrection, where no one is mysteriously exempt. Laurie Gruen writes that studying the ways in which animals mourn may help us more easily swallow what will be on the table at the universal burial feast, and I wonder if this is the primary lesson to be learned from their grief. In spite of my lapsed Catholicism, one of my favorite demonstrations took place inside a church. Our images of animals in various stages of slaughter were uncannily mirrored by the stations of the cross on the pillars. And on one side there were uninteresting deaths to be regarded with indifference, and on the other were illustrations of exceptional suffering and death to be grieved for millennia. Areas of contradiction always have a quality of holiness. yet the expressions on both sets of faces were the same, the eyes staring, the skin sagging, the mouths drooping open. Having survived mass extinctions and borne the worst burdens of the work of our repression, animals share a list of stations of the cross that vastly outnumber that of our species, and there's perhaps no one better to share our food with at this time. To be grown up is to sit at the table with all who have died, not only people, and to also see ourselves as members of that group. However, Christianity is still a pagan religion at its core. Through reverence for the cycles of living and dying, the cult of the god of madness, who Nietzsche drew inspiration from, and the gratitude for all that is lush and loving, I can perhaps perceive my alternating euphoria and retreat from the world differently. The mad woman who came before me were said to be strong enough to uproot trees and tear men from limb to limb so horribly that they no longer appeared human. And I dream that the same magic will allow us to make the factories become silent so that we can start hearing the rustling of leaves within ourselves. It's Just a Diet, a story of how, what, and who we eat is always personal, by Lena Wren. Imagine your mind has become your body's biggest predator, that your own brain has morphed into a merciless and direct threat to your own existence. Like being your own prisoner, you are tortured by thoughts that demand you pursue your own self-destruction. Every day you're forced to effectuate your own death. Your body hurts in ways few can imagine. You are constantly in a state of utter exhaustion, yet you're performing at levels few even reach when they're healthy. You are breaking down, maintaining a feeble but convincing facade. You're scared, but you can't show it. You can't stop. You're dying in front of everyone who claims to love you, and no one is saying a thing. Their silence is their consent. I remember seeing my rib cage from my front and my back and measuring the size of my arms with my fingers. I remember the intoxicating feeling I had the day I discovered that the tips of my thumb and forefinger could wrap around my bicep and touch. I remember the feeling my heart flutter like a light about to go out. No one knew. I remember the pain in my cracked bones, muscle fatigue, my body like fresh flesh draped on bones and muscles with no free will or feeling. I remember the flatness, the sensation of being unaffected by anything. I remember sinking deeper and deeper into this universe, and the deeper I sunk, the less I could recognize the surface. I remember the feeling of exhaustion, immense amount of effort it took to move and think and exist. I remember running for track practice and then leaving and running some more. I remember lying because it seemed I had no other choice. I remember hiding out alone like a frightened fugitive on the run, crying myself to sleep, wondering if I'd wake up and if death was the only form of available relief. I felt as dead as a living being can be, but in a way it felt fearless. I could face death and pain. I was impervious to loss and heartbreak. Nothing could touch me, nothing could hurt me more than myself. 7. The ground was wet and the air thick and heavy. It had rained last night. The kids made their way to the bus stop on the corner. Some were accompanied by a parent, others walked alone. All had backpacks hoisted tightly onto their backs. Most had a lunchbox in hand. I could see them lining up in the driveway 2 doors down. The bus would arrive in about 7 minutes, and I wasn't going to be first in line today. I walked briskly, hoping to snag second. It was a Thursday, and my class had gym today. I never liked gym. The boys scared me, and I wasn't all that good at sports. Sure, I was athletic enough, but I was a smart kid, and the accelerated group for everything. School wasn't hard. I had friends, I rarely had homework, and all the teachers liked me. I arrived at the bus stop with 5 minutes to spare. The sky started to sprinkle again. I looked down to shield my face from the rain. Earthworms everywhere. Some of them were a little dry, sticking to the pavement. I thought of the way my skin hurts when it is dry. Some of them were smashed from footsteps and the wheels of cars, and some of them were slowly squirming towards the grass simply because something in them wanted to survive. a drive present even in seemingly insignificant beings. I had 5 minutes, so I started picking the struggling worms off the road and tossing them into the grass so they had a chance at living. It rained again that night. I thought about the worms. 8. At the toy store, the teddy bears had been carelessly tossed onto a shelf, some upside down, some with their heads hitting the bars, all packed in like sardines. I rearranged them. Now they could all see out, and not a single one was being poked by the metal shelf. It felt like it mattered, even though it didn't. 13. My yearly physical. You gained 5 pounds since last year, the doctor said. How do you feel about that? Fine, I said, but the truth was that I had been feeling fine until that moment. The doctor's question implied I was supposed to feel something. What was I supposed to feel? 5 pounds. I was 13. I was growing. But 5 pounds. I felt shame. 14. I was picking out a sandwich at the airport, thinking about greyhound racing. Humans racing dogs, and when the dogs lose, they get put in little crates to starve and die. I had met a few greyhounds that had been rescued from these conditions, and although they were happy, their bodies were laced with scars from the racetrack and the crates. It always made me feel sad. No one should ever have to live that way. Cold, alone, condemned, enslaved. Suddenly, I couldn't separate the greyhounds from the thin slabs of flesh we called cold cuts. Cold cuts, pieces of bodies mutilated and removed just far enough from their recognizable living state to appease us and allow us to consume without interference from our conscience. No one should have to die for another to live. I ordered a vegetarian sandwich and silently pledged to myself I'd never eat meat again. 14. I looked at my thighs. They looked too big. I felt gross and unworthy. I hated my body. And then a thought occurred to me. I could do something about the way I looked. I could make myself into what I wanted to be. So I threw away my lunch. It felt sneaky, even dirty, but it felt good. It felt powerful. 15. I had my first period. I cried. They always asked you that question at the doctor, right after they asked you about your weight. Do you have your period? An answer of yes felt like some sort of weird failure. Amenorrhea was a symptom of good anorexic, one whose body was too thin to produce a period. I was failing, so I would work harder. 16. I was losing weight. I could see pieces of me disappearing from my body, and it felt safe and comforting. Invisibility was safety, and I was becoming invisible. But the world goes on, and I did too. People laughed, they ignored, they said they were envious of my self-discipline. They got angry with a distorted sort of jealousy. You're so thin. They threatened me. They screamed at me. They denied my experience, calling everything I said a lie. They told me to just eat. They cried, saying it was too hard to watch me die. And then they left. I can't be your friend if you continue to act this way. I was screaming and no one heard me. I was bleeding out and no one offered as much as a band-aid. I felt forgotten and misunderstood. My condition wasn't real. I was dying, and it really seemed like no one noticed. If they cared, it seemed like it was only because they wanted to stop so they didn't have to see it anymore. I was disappearing, and it seemed like that's what people wanted. I had no value apart from my ability to vanish. It hurt. I can't watch, she said about the video of the cows panicking in terror as they were prodded down the chute leading to a kill floor. I can't watch you do this to yourself, she said about my disease, as if it was my choice. She turned her back and walked away. She just couldn't watch. 17. 10, the nurse said. She wrote 10 on her log sheet next to the phrase, beats per minute. This was the 3rd time they had checked my vitals that day. My arm was bruised from all the 6 a.m. blood draws. I hadn't told them I didn't eat meat. I had told them I didn't eat meat when I arrived the week prior. They looked at me suspiciously with disapproval, then said I couldn't follow a vegetarian diet while on the inpatient unit. A lot of anorexics say they're vegetarian as a way to easily cut out a whole category of foods. I felt angry. Deciding not to eat meat was the only decision I had ever made about food that had been for a non-disordered reason. I didn't want to eat animals, because to me, a pig was no different than a dog. Both were beings, not products. And there I was, mind entirely wasted from years of starvation, body inches away from death, spirit entirely broken from the subjugation of my person by anorexia, having one of the only remaining remnants of my true self questioned and discarded by those who had the authority over me in that moment. It was then that I fully understood what it feels like to be stripped of your autonomy. I was forbidden from making decisions about myself. I was locked in a unit. Anything I wanted required permission. I was watched 24 hours a day. Someone else controlled what went into my body. If I misbehaved, I faced consequences. I wasn't allowed to leave until I put whatever they wanted inside me. What it feels like is rape. It is messy and scary, and you're not in control. Violation after violation. No escape, shame, and the terror, it never ends. I remembered every night crying myself to sleep silently in fear, and it didn't end when I left the hospital. I have an eating disorder, anorexia. It's not just disordered eating, a few periods of restriction, and occasional feelings of body dissatisfaction. No, it's full-on, fucked-up eating disorder. And it has led me to the edge of death more than a few times. I didn't choose it, it chose me. And where some have seen extraordinary self-discipline, exceptional self-control, amazing focus and determination, tremendous success, I have experienced a hell that can never be mitigated by any supposed name benefit it appears to provide. That free-range pig, he's the same. Sure, his maimed flesh has been labeled free-range, reality of which is questionable, but that didn't make the long moment where he waited behind his friends in terror, smelling the smell of death, any easier. That didn't make his bleeding out after being savagely hung by his leg, having his throat slit any less violent. That cow, just because she isn't being raised only to die, doesn't make the forceful penetration of her vagina any less barbaric. It doesn't make the deep distress and depression she feels when her baby is taken away from her any more justified. It doesn't vindicate a culture who forces her to endure the pain of rape, infanticide, and slavery. Her nipples are squeezed till they're bleeding and raw. Her baby is killed. She is weak from having to produce so much milk, and she is eventually murdered by a hammer to the head. Those chicks, the males are ground up alive, and the females will be housed in the dark, fixed to a cage not big enough for one. And all of them, they will not go easily or peacefully. They all struggle and fight to survive till the moment their heart stops. They will scream in agony, they will shriek and wail, they will thrash and writhe. There is no redemption in the creation of such a hell. I can tell you something I know to be true. Nothing willingly gives itself over to death. No, we all struggle and fight till our last breath. My body has survived 12 years of a deadly abuse at the hands of my disease. I survived only because all life, has a tremendous drive to live and will to fight to survive against seemingly insurmountable odds. The farmed animal does the same. When she walks onto that kill floor, she does so not of her own volition, but by brutal force. Along with her family and friends, she fights to survive through failed shots at her head by stun guns, through beating, through hanging, through the violent slitting of her throat, through submersion in boiling tanks of water, through every act of torture she must endure in the name of a diet. In her darkest hour, there is not a single bit of comfort to be found. She knows she's being killed, but there is nothing she can do. She screams, no one hears her. She wails, no one stops. She mourns, no one is there. I always knew I was dying, but that part stopped being scary. It was the abandonment, the screaming without being heard, the teetering on the edge of death in terror that formed my hell. It was having my struggle denied, minimized, disregarded, and normalized that hurt. It was having my value and purpose defined by an entity outside myself that terrified me most. It's just a diet, an expression used to justify ignorance and apathy towards my condition. It's just a diet, a statement used to sanction the deliberate holocaust of billions of innocent beings, each with its own conception of purpose and a good life. It is not easy to care. It hurts. Because the human soul wants to relate. We instinctually suffer with each other. By nature, we feel with and for others. We shut this instinct off in favor of simple bliss. We ignore it because feeling is hard. But feeling is brave and strong. Love is courageous because what you love will love. What you love, you will defend. I need someone to be brave and strong for me when I need it most. But instead, they turn their backs. I will not do the same. Like those worms, my skin is dry. Like those greyhounds, I have starved. Like those pigs, I know abandonment. Like those cows, my suffering has been ignored. Like those chicks, most people just couldn't watch. My silence is my consent. My inaction is my moral baseline. If I truly care, I can't turn my back every time it hurts. Personal choices aren't simply choices when they result in the death of another who didn't want to die. Slavery is slavery in any form. Torture is wrong, no matter who is the subject. And pain is felt deeply by every sentient being, even if our tears don't look the same. They don't want to die. I didn't want to die either. And we could all use someone who's brave enough to feel our pain. It's just a diet, but the suffering doesn't stop when we close our eyes. Altering my life to reflect what I know to be true and right has been far from easy. As someone with an eating disorder, making any sort of dietary change is immensely triggering, especially when it involves cutting something out of my diet. My body and my brain react harshly, responding with a sort of PTSD from the days I was dying in front of everyone, and no one seemed to notice. It triggers a sort of innate internal fear, a hopelessness, anxiety, anger, frustration. It is painful and it feels unfair. But if I allowed the triggering nature of eliminating all animal products from my diet to prevent me from doing so, it would be equivalent to adopting the mindset of an abuser. I have to eat because I have an eating disorder. I abuse because I was abused. It is my moral imperative to make sure the cycle stops with me. My own struggles do not justify complacency. Rather, they should inform my ability to feel compassion for the unwilling victims to a destructive diet. I have a choice, they do not. I have autonomy, they have been stripped of theirs. The cycle has to stop with me, because I, more than anyone, know that it's far more than just a diet. Them by Joanne C. When my dear friend and chosen life partner, Rufus, was diagnosed with 2 kinds of cancer last spring, I wasn't sure how I would survive without him. He saved my life. When he first came to live with us, his ribs protruded abruptly from his sides. There was a cigarette burn mark on his back. He was picked up by the pound in rural Ohio. With only days left to live, he was sold to a small animal rescue organization. The day we picked him up, he slept soundly in his crate in the back of the car through several hours of driving. He saved me. He was so anxious to be left alone, the opposite of my problem. He loved everyone he met immediately, and he convinced lifelong dog fearers to pet his head and let him in their houses. The day Phoebe came to live with us, she didn't know how to walk on a leash, so I carried her. She was afraid of everything, still is. She didn't know how to play with a ball or jump on a bed or walk upstairs. She saved my life. When we went into the laboratory, barks erupted from every direction. Tiny beagles hopping up and down, vying for our attention. She stood quietly, looking out from behind the bars. What about this one? Oh, you don't want that one. She has epilepsy. She probably won't get adopted. She saved me. She takes a pill twice a day and has regular vet visits. She calmed him down. She provides companionship, and she's in charge. He provides protection and scopes out new situations for her. The first year that seasonal depression hit me really hard was the first year they were both there for it too. I was unemployed, deep in debt, and the traumatic things I had seen in my activism were finally catching up to me. They saved my life. I wouldn't have done it for myself, I'm certain, but I would do it for them. I would take them outside in the morning and lay in the grass with the sun on my face. They would lay with me in bed and watch Netflix movies. When I felt so alone, they would look at me with all the love in their eyes. They saved me. We understand each other. They get it. What it's like to have past traumas. What it's like to be anxious. I get it. What it's like to be sick. To take medication. All the doctor visits. We help each other the way only people who understand pain can. We love each other the way only people who know hope can. I thought they saved my life, but no one can save me. It was me, recognizing a part of me in them. They showed me my own strength. Because of them, I felt something again after the emptiness of those cold days. I allowed myself to love them. I saved my own life. Joanne C. is a temporary expression of the universe through the form of a woman who doesn't like being told what to do, likes long walks on the beach, for real, though, as long as the dogs are allowed to, and writes a lot more than she talks. You can read more of her writing at unfoldingthemyth.wordpress.com. Patron Saint of Animals. Zapek's art pieces incorporates elements of old paintings of saints, coupled with animals to create a sort of current era patron saint of animals, and also shows personal self-harm scars and autistic sensory fascinations of textures such as wool, on a live sheep, of course. The image is of a person with purple hair and a headband that reads, "Go vegan," with a cow, a chicken, and a sheep. The person is touching the sheep's head. Zapek's art lives in North Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. They are gender fluid, 20-year-old, mentally ill, autistic, cool cat artists with a passion for animals and art. My Friends by Connor. Broken, braced, sullen-faced, bedridden again. It is not the being sick that bothers me, so much as the whispered stigma. And if I ever do find a means to hack it in the rat race, to monetize my suffering, I will remember who was there when there were none. The cats and the distant coyotes. Connor is a male-gendered artist and cannabis, disability rights, and mental health activist from New Jersey of the United States, and someone who has been organizing with the Icarus Project in NYC since the fall of 2014. On Being an Inactivist, a self-reflection essay on activism, chronic illness, and ableism by Nix. I was born into the animal liberation movement. When most children were donning towel capes and pretending to be superheroes, I was joining my mother at anti-vivisection demonstrations at the University of Washington. I felt like a real-life superhero for the animals, an unstoppable force of compassionate justice. Every stranger I spoke with and every flyer I handed out felt like we were one step closer to freeing my non-human friends from a lifetime of torturous captivity. I was born into a chronically ill body. When most children would come to school with a cold, I would be in bed with pneumonia, bronchitis, ear and sinus infections, sprained ankles, torn tendons. I spent a lot of time in that bed. Depression and anxiety seeped into my being before I even hit my double digits. By the time I entered adulthood, I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, celiac disease, Asperger's syndrome, ADHD, dysthymia, dyspraxia, and anxiety/panic disorder. I am an activist. At least on my good days, when my joints don't feel like they're filled with gravel, my mind isn't racing while trying to process layers upon layers of information. I'm not throwing up from severe pain and dizziness, and I'm not having a complete meltdown because I'm in complete sensory overload. When you're a walking grab bag of illnesses and disorders, you never know when you'll catch a break from the multitude of symptoms that plague your every step. When I do participate, I require more recovery time than most. All too often, I fear committing to attending protests, demonstrations, fundraisers, and meetings. It worries me that I might take on a role of importance at any particular event, only to awaken with a massive flare-up of symptoms and have to inform someone that I cannot fulfill my expected duties. Nobody talks about ableism in activist spaces. Few people ever have to consider it. That is how privilege works. We as activists express a desire to uphold anti-oppressionist values, yet there are moments in which I feel like I am a complete disappointment and slowly becoming less valuable to the movement. There are days when my head is too heavy to lift from my pillow, and I'm paralyzed by anxious thoughts of not being good enough for these animals I hold so dear to my heart. Sometimes they make me want to quit, to throw in my activist towel and accept a life without it. But I'm still an activist. Even with this differently abled mind and body, activism means not giving up in the face of adversity. It means staring down the insurmountable obstacles and tackling them head on. We challenge tyrannic corporations when most passively accept the horrendous atrocities they commit every single day. We raise our voices when others are silent. We lock ourselves to the weapons of our enemies when others walk away. We disrupt the unethical status quo while most seek to inoffensively maintain it. Uplift and support your chronically ill comrades. Don't shame us for our unexpected sick days or our inability to shoulder the same load as you. Remember that we are fighting more than animal exploitation and corporate greed. We're also in an unending battle with ourselves. Nix is a chronically ill activist in Portland, Oregon, and they are currently affiliated with No New Animal Lab, Northwest Animal Rights Network, Portland Animal Liberation, and the Student Animal Liberation Coalition at Portland State University. On Being an Inactivist, a self-reflection essay on activism, chronic illness, and ableism by Nix. I was born into the animal liberation movement. When most children were donning towel capes and pretending to be superheroes, I was joining my mother at anti-vivisection demonstrations at the University of Washington. I felt like a real-life superhero for the animals, an unstoppable force of compassionate justice. Every stranger I spoke with and every flyer I handed out felt like we were one step closer to freeing my non-human friends from a lifetime of torturous captivity. I was born into a chronically ill body. When most children would come to school with a cold, I would be in bed with pneumonia, bronchitis, ear and sinus infections, sprained ankles, torn tendons. I spent a lot of time in that bed. Depression and anxiety seeped into my being before I even hit my double digits. By the time I entered adulthood, I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, celiac disease, Asperger's syndrome, ADHD, dysthymia, dyspraxia, and anxiety/panic disorder. I am an activist. At least on my good days, when my joints don't feel like they're filled with gravel, my mind isn't racing while trying to process layers upon layers of information. I'm not throwing up from severe pain and dizziness, and I'm not having a complete meltdown because I'm in complete sensory overload. When you're a walking grab bag of illnesses and disorders, you never know when you'll catch a break from the multitude of symptoms that plague your every step. When I do participate, I require more recovery time than most. All too often, I fear committing to attending protests, demonstrations, fundraisers, and meetings. It worries me that I might take on a role of importance at any particular event, only to awaken with a massive flare-up of symptoms and have to inform someone that I cannot fulfill my expected duties. Nobody talks about ableism in activist spaces. Few people ever have to consider it. That is how privilege works. We as activists express a desire to uphold anti-oppressionist values, yet there are moments in which I feel like I am a complete disappointment and slowly becoming less valuable to the movement. There are days when my head is too heavy to lift from my pillow, and I'm paralyzed by anxious thoughts of not being good enough for these animals I hold so dear to my heart. Sometimes they make me want to quit, to throw in my activist towel and accept a life without it. But I'm still an activist. Even with this differently abled mind and body, activism means not giving up in the face of adversity. It means staring down the insurmountable obstacles and tackling them head on. We challenge tyrannic corporations when most passively accept the horrendous atrocities they commit every single day. We raise our voices when others are silent. We lock ourselves to the weapons of our enemies when others walk away. We disrupt the unethical status quo while most seek to inoffensively maintain it. Uplift and support your chronically ill comrades. Don't shame us for our unexpected sick days or our inability to shoulder the same load as you. Remember that we are fighting more than animal exploitation and corporate greed. We're also in an unending battle with ourselves. Nix is a chronically ill activist in Portland, Oregon, and they are currently affiliated with No New Animal Lab, Northwest Animal Rights Network, Portland Animal Liberation, and the Student Animal Liberation Coalition at Portland State University. No Love Without Justice by Clementine Morgan. My resonance with non-human animals has always been rooted in a shared desire not to experience capture, terror, violence. My vegetarianism started at the age of 6 when I understood what meat was and where it came from. I have never eaten meat again. As the years went on, I began to understand the expansiveness of cruelty towards animals in so many of the industries we take part in. I started cutting out more and more things. First gelatin, then rennet, and so on. Today I'm vegan, but I don't believe that my dietary practices are the most ethically superior or that they make me morally pure. I write this as a white settler, currently living on occupied Haudenosaunee, Huron, Wendat, Anishinaabeg land. I recognize that I'm complicit in many violences simply by being here, and many more by having this computer to type on. I see veganism as an act of solidarity with non-human animals, but I take issue with many of the mainstream vegan movements, tactics, and strategies. I do not believe that killing for food is inherently wrong, but I do believe that capture and torture are. As a child who was experiencing sexual abuse, I resonated deeply with the helplessness and terror of caged animals. As a disabled person living with a legacy of violence in my body and mind, I continue to feel that resonance. It's not that I love animals, I want justice for them, just as I want justice for all people, plants, ecosystems, weather systems, and for this planet. My traumatized body is here as an act of resistance and defiance to violent and oppressive systems. I'm committed to continuous learning, continuous work, and continuous care in seeking justice. Clementine Morgan is a queer femme, traumatized, sober addict, witch, writer, and artist. They are a white settler living on colonized land, known as Toronto Turtle Island. Clementine's work spans genres and mediums, including essays, poetry, creative nonfiction, zines, illustration, short film, self-portraits, and sculpture. More of their work can be found at clementinemorgan.com. Feed Me by Raven Mad. Feed me. Give me yourself. I need it now. Share some, please. I starve. Give me your hope. Before it is too late, give me more. I hunger. For the color, for the meaning. I can't stop now. I am you. Who are you, if not me? We are fed. Temple Grandin Sees a Psychoanalyst by Tori Ophelia. When Temple Grandin was younger, perhaps around the same time she had contemplated becoming a vegetarian, and she still believed that her dreams had meaning, enough to bother writing them down at least, she recorded the following one morning. Quote, October 25th, 1971. Swift was a 6-story building. Only the first floor of this building was a slaughterhouse, and when I found a secret elevator, it transported me to the upper floors. These upper levels consisted of beautiful museums and libraries that contained much of the world's culture. End quote. At night she had been alone with the dead, plummeting deeper and deeper into the water that they swam in, the water from which she had ingested microorganisms and poison that danced on the walls of her head. Whether she sensed it or not, I cannot know, but they were holding her down so that she could not breathe, and reminding her that the assembly line to the spiritual flowering of our being is paved by Tyson Foods, Cargill, and meatpacking institutions of many other kinds. The doctor who taught compliance for a living was suddenly confronted by something that she had no language for. Earlier, she had looked in the phone book, hoping to find the number of someone capable of providing explanations for her odd nighttime predicament. Within the space of a few weeks, after a brief conversation, she entered the office of a psychoanalyst with a thickly bristled tail and very large ears, who suggested that she take a therapeutic soak in the dip vat of John Wayne Red River feed yard to humanely drown her fears. After all, a cold bath was the recommended treatment for some of the maladies of the psyche not long ago. She found this to be the most convenient, if she had access to the facility, and she signed the consent forms in a hurry to leave. The doctor criticized her for this, doubting that she had the patience to come in for an hour for 5 days each week, but she replied that she had perfected the pace of the kill line, and that there would be no time for subterranean travels with the current demands of her job. When evening began to fall after a long day, she stripped and submerged herself, allowing each breath of accumulated silt to weigh her down. She was used to putting her body in places of the bodies of animals, but the one instant in their lives that she could not replace at all was death. However, unknown to her, chemical organ phosphates settled in her lungs and caused fur to sprout in the convulsions of her brain, producing, among other effects, vivid and wild dreams. Since she claims that she was born without an unconscious, her victims gave her one as a gift. Freud has described as a similar house to Ludwig Binswanger in a letter many years before this incident occurred. The lowest level of his house, the basement, contained horrors that his guests unwittingly dined and conversed on top of, enjoying symphonies, sculptures, and oil paintings. The upper floors of both houses had beautiful music coming from them, but they are still slaughterhouses at the end of the day. A difference, however, is that Grandin's unconscious is represented as a factory in her dreams. Could there not be a better example of Deleuze and Guattari's view of the psyche as machinic assemblage? The mind has often been represented as a house or a theater, and I have visited my own house in dreams before. My house was built from sugared petals in decay. At first, nothing appeared particularly strange about that house other than the emptiness of its rooms, which reminded me of bones with no marrow. The drawers appeared dusty and unused. All that I found in them was a knot of hair from indeterminable species and charred rib belongings to a small animal. Then the insulation of the house, the part that was hidden within the walls, enveloped me like multiple arms. I saw that it was made from human limbs and the carcasses of animals, and it leaks from a hole in the ceiling as a fluid. Crossing the threshold of that house marked my third descent into melancholy. Nemesis by Milda. This piece talks about the struggle being seen as lesser than everyone else's in today's world, and how the hate from the outside world turns into self-hate. The image is of a piece of art in black and white, with a person sitting in front of a page with words in the background. Milda Band-Zaitze lives in Lithuania, Germany, and the UK, creating behind the alias AIWS. They are an artistic, queer, vegan artist, and their work mostly portrays the cruel and dark world, as well as questions humanity and its imperfections. www.aiws.lt. ECT's Shocking Origins by Mike Hyde. Content warning: animal abuse and psychiatric assault. Many people are unaware of the fact that shock treatment, now known as electroconvulsive therapy or ECT, is still common within the psychiatric system. Dr. Peter Breggin estimates that a couple 100,000 Americans a year are subjected to this procedure. Unfortunately, exact numbers and statistics for other countries could not be found. Even lesser known in ECT origins. Invented in fascist Italy in 1938 by psychiatrists Ugo Cerletti and Lucio Bini, their inspiration for it came from observing hogs being rendered docile when shocked with cattle prod on their way to a slaughter. This process has changed over time and is now known as electrical stunning. It involves the application of two electrodes to pass an electric current through the animal's brain, rendering them unconscious. The Humane Slaughter Association recommends at least 200 volts be used. Similarly, modern ECT involves the application of 2 electrodes, usually to both sides of the person's head, which passes 1 to 200 volts of electricity through the brain. This causes a major convulsion, seizure, coma, and a flatlining of the brain waves. ECT was first tested on dogs, with one group ending up so badly brain damage the inventors were obliged to discontinue. From there it was tested on a homeless man against his will, who during the procedure shrieked, "Not another, it will kill me." And one of the inventors later confessed that at the time he thought it ought to be abolished. As a product of the eugenics era, it's not surprising that Nazi doctors also employed it on concentration camp inmates. What might surprise people is its use in combination with LSD and the power of suggestion in attempts to brainwash people at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal in the 50s and 60s. ECT was the first stage and was meant to wipe the mind, which it did and continues to do today, with memory loss being one of the most common side effects, sometimes completely erasing memories of events and occasions as well as skills learned before the procedure. ECT is also used as an implicit threat to make people comply, as demonstrated in the testimony of psychiatric inmates. Within those testimonies, there is even a sense of being led to slaughter, according to Dr. Burstow, and a survivor reports that, "I felt like an animal," which makes sense given its origins and the fact that electrical stunning is still common in slaughterhouses today. On top of all this, ECT is not effective. Studies have shown it works no better than a placebo, except when it is being administered, and even then it is only marginally better. If you are outraged that this procedure not only continues, but is actually on the rise in some parts of the world, I urge you to get informed and involved. Most groups working on the issue of psychiatric abuse actively oppose ECT. For annual demos on ECT, see ectjustice.com/protest. To find a group or start a group in your area, search mindfreedom.org and the icarusprojects.net. Mike I lives in Ontario, Canada, and is a psychiatrized person, who is labeled and diagnosed by the system at a young age, so he has a lot of experience navigating that system. He's anti-psychiatry and believes that making our world less distressing, developing non-hierarchical and decentralized alternatives, practicing mutual aid and interdependency, and not being judgmental towards those who experience things differently from what society considers normal would be much better than continuing to allow psychiatry to have a monopoly on care. He's a vegan and in the past has organized with the grassroots Ontario Animal Liberation Network, Kitchener Ontario Animal Liberation Alliance, and the Canadian Animal Liberation Movement. He has mostly anarchist leanings and works on many other issues as well as a focus on poverty, pro-feminism, queer struggles, and environmentalism. Can't You Hear Them by A. Beeswax. And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. "Do you hear them now?" he asked again. She didn't respond. With face buried in hands, she remained still, slumped in the chair. Her skin felt dry and her body trembled slightly from the cold air that seemed to seep into every room of this institution. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she paused and listened. The dull hum of lights above her persisted, and she heard now, too, the soft scribbling of pen against paper. The pain in her head continued to ache, so that she felt the slow repetition of her heartbeat pulsing blood through ears and forehead. Slowly, with exaggerated movements, she swayed her head and her hands back and forth, answering the question. More scribbling. "Now tell me what you see," he continued, sliding his hand across the bare surface of the steel-bolted table between them both. Her eyes dilated as she tried to refocus her attention, peering out from behind her hands that still covered her face. Squinting against the fluorescent lighting that soaked the small room, her eyes roamed about the papers before her, studying the messy blots of black ink that covered the papers. Then she saw it. Amongst the random smears and puddles, she saw a small pair of black eyes staring up at her. She saw too then the long, slender antlers perched atop their head, gracefully crowning the creature that stared up at her. An animal, she answered with hesitation. The pen began to scribble again. What do you see? She asked, as she looked up to meet his steady gaze, her voice dry and cracking in her sore throat. Do not mind what I see. I am not sick, he answered, turning his eyes back down to his notes. Now how long has it been since you've eaten an animal? The thought of eating brought back her attention to the pains of hunger that stabbed at her insides, gnawing away in her stomach with each meal that she could not eat, that she would not eat. Many years now, she answered absently, staring off across the room, noticing again the single window in the room. How long have I been here? She wondered faintly, watching the sunlight sparkle on the wall as it poured through the window glass. How long have you felt depressed about life? I'm not depressed, she said sharply. My professional opinion would disagree, he said, raising his voice. I'm not depressed. I'm mourning the animals. Your symptoms of prolonged stress and negativity, caused by past experiences of trauma, have led you to embrace a series of delusions about society. Your mistaken belief that animals are suffering enables these delusions. To put it simply, you are mentally sick with excessive empathy to animals. But they are suffering. I heard them. I have been conducting experiments upon animals for over 20 years, and never have I heard them communicate a feeling as complex as suffering. Maybe that is because you aren't listening to them when I'm eager to study your illness more, he interrupted. I wish to understand better what has caused someone of such a typical background and upbringing to suddenly fixate on the lives of animals. You must understand that this overconcern, this excessive sensitivity, is a nuisance. Why do you wish to share the pain of this animal? I can't help it. I cannot not feel it. More scribbling. Would you say that you hate human beings? She began to respond, but held back her words, choosing instead to slowly push back her chair and in her slippers shuffle over to the window. Feeling the warmth of the sun against her pale skin, she leaned against the glass to look outside. Unless you can convince me otherwise, I'm inclined to diagnose your behavior as some unique form of hysterical neurosis. It seems to have been ruining your own life for many years, but has more recently begun spreading these delusions to others. He continued to keep talking aloud, even as she slowly stopped listening and instead turned her attention outwards, to life outside this room. Her eyes, sore from crying, slowly roamed the view from the window. They must have been on the third or fourth floor, she realized, staring down at the different people, oblivious to her, rushing past, late for work and for appointments, she imagined. A large maple tree stood nearby, silently towering above, but the people also were oblivious to its presence. Continued disregard of bodily safety, coupled with insistent denial of your own culpability, exaggerating this illness while spreading it. Why was he still talking? Decided you remain a significant security risk to the public order and economic freedom of the pork industry. Why am I here? And so it is my responsibility to certify you into our facility for a minimum of 90 days, at which point you will receive another examination to assess whether you are ready to stand trial for your crimes. Do you understand? She took a labored swallow, feeling the scratching of dryness of her throat struggle to push down her own sickness. She opened her mouth to take a breath and felt her body begin to shake as more tears, ran down her face. She sobbed without shame, unable to hold down her feelings of frustration and fear that she experienced in this place, being isolated from everyone she knew and feeling so anxious now about the pigs. Then she heard them, the singing of voices. Her eyes looked about before finding a nest perched atop the maple tree branch closest to the window. Shaded from the sunlight sat a family of birds chirping, singing together. They're so beautiful, she thought, studying their small beaks, slender throats that produced such a pleasant harmony. Do you hear that? She asked. I don't hear anything, he said as he rose from the table and moved to leave the room. Can't you hear them? She said again, smiling.